may find the following disturbing. Discretion is advised.
The Bears.
Because of the way they play the nickel corner here, and the nickel corner plays 88, 85% of the snaps. He's got to be like part linebacker.
The Bears.
When you're in a scouting room, there's going to be differences of opinion.
The Bears.
Once coaches get involved, of course, they've got their own opinions about what fits best for what they want to do, and that could be drastically different than what the scouts say.
Well, you're looking at traits, and he tested very, very well.
The Bears.
One thing good about Kevin, he's been with 2 other organizations, as well as being the commissioner of the Big Ten. He's been around.
The Bears.
With Greg Olson, Jerry didn't want to get rid of him. I didn't want to get rid of him. Nobody wanted to get rid of him. One guy wanted to get rid of him. Mike Martz, because Mike Martz didn't know what the hell to do with him. We tried to talk Lovey out of hiring Mike Martz for a month and a half. He's playing zone, but number one, he doesn't get enough depth with the drop. But who the hell's good? How many times does a 305, 310-pound defensive tackle drop into coverage, especially in a key situation?
The Bears.
Greg, why are teams wrong on quarterback evaluation so often?
Number one, it's a hard position to evaluate. There's probably not as many real good quarterback evaluators as there needs to be.
The Bears. The Bears. The Bears.
Welcome, everyone, to a fresh episode of GTF Gabriel Talks Football. My name is Aldo Gandia, and a happy Father's Day to everyone. I also want to say this quick programming note. We're going to have a show on Wednesday, Bare Their Souls, and there'll be more programming throughout the week. But what you got to do is subscribe to the channel. That way you'll get alerts on your devices when we're going live with Bears programming. And we've got other programming. Of course, this is the home of Mike North and his Somebody Big Just Died show. Unfortunately, he's being populated a lot lately with so many famous people passing away. But we're very, very happy that this man here is still alive and with us. Greg Gabriel.
I'm glad I'm alive. Gee, thanks.
What a segue, huh? Greg, yesterday was Father's Day. I did not tell you I was going to ask you this question, so it's going to come out of the blue. But you are a father of beautiful girls. You're also a stepfather, and you are the son of an American hero. So I'd love for you to talk to our audience about the importance of fathers and Father's Day to start the show. And I apologize for putting you on the spot here without giving you time to think about that big, lofty question.
Well, in all honesty, I've always put Father's Day in second place to Mother's Day.
There you go. Sure.
Mothers are the most important. They do all the work. They pretty much raise the kids and dad, I know in the household I grew up in, my dad worked and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I, we had a big family. I had 6 brothers and sisters. So I've always put the mom on top, but appreciate Father's Day. I got great kids. I got great stepkids, and they all called me. My stepson came over with his sons yesterday, and that was fun. Heard from my wife, who is working in enemy territory right now in Detroit, and that's all she hears is lion shit there too. It's tough, but it's a big day. My dad always tried to play golf on Father's Day. I played with him a few times, but I'll tell you one thing about Father's Day. It is the worst day to go play golf. It's a good day to watch the U.S. Open. I remember one time I went to a public course. This is when I was living in Buffalo and before I had joined a golf club. So 3 of my friends and myself went to this place. It was called Glen Oak Golf Club in Amherst, New York, a suburb of Buffalo. And Father's Day is always packed. You take dad out to play a round of golf. It's the slowest round of golf in like the year by far.
Yep.
We had only gotten 12 holes done, and we were already 5.5 hours in.
Oh,
So we just said, screw it, left after 12 holes, because it was just, might have been a 7.5 hour round, which is way, way, way too long. Anything more than 4 is too long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you on that. Do not go play golf on holidays. Father's Day and July 4th, stay away because but yeah, Father's Day is the worst of the two by all means. Speaking of golf, I understand you saw some of that US Open and the winner hits a 50-foot putt to win.
Actually, I thought it was, I estimated 50 was 64.
Wow.
But all he had to do was 2-putt. But
yes,
2-putt from 64 feet isn't easy.
That's right.
Especially on those greens. But that I watched pretty much the whole thing, the Open, starting with Thursday. I watched a lot each day.
Cool.
I really enjoy the Open because it's always a tough course. It's a tough test of golf, and it brings the best to their knees.
Yep.
Especially because of the narrow fairways, the long rough, and you hit in the rough and you're in trouble. But this guy JJ Spawn, he comes out, he's leading the tournament after day one. He's 4 under, and then everybody got like it does with all US Opens, the pack comes back to the leader, or the leader comes back to the pack, I guess is the best way to put it. And then going into yesterday, there was only 3 golfers under par with -3 leading the tournament. And all those guys started off low. I mean, especially Spawn. I think he bogeyed 4 or 5 of the first 4 or 5 or 4 out of 5 of the first 5 holes.
Right.
And had rain delay, and he kind of like caught his breath in the rain delay. And when you listen to him on the in the press conference after, he says that's when he just, he had a long talk with himself and with his coach, and he just went out more relaxed and said, let's play a hole at a time. And he started to get some birdies and came back, and the birdie the last 2 holes, and he drives the green on 17 and only puts a 12-foot past the cup. I mean, that was a remarkable drive. It wasn't a long hole, 310 yards, but his drive was perfect. And then that putt on 18, and like I say, he only needed to get down in 2 to win, but to sink it just sealed it. But what I liked even better was the guy who had a chance of being a tie if he 3-putted it, Fitzpatrick, who's from Scotland. He's sitting in there. I don't know if you saw it, but he's in the scorer's room and he's watching it on TV, and he sees it, the putt go in, and he just starts clapping for JJ and just goes,
cool.
You just see him mouthing. He goes, wow, and it was just an incredible moment. And listening to him, what a grounded guy. I'd never heard of this guy until 2 months ago when he went neck and neck with Rory McIlroy in the Players Championship, and since then, I mean, the guy's made $10 million this year. He's had a good year. Of course, yesterday he made 4.3. So,
yeah, not bad, huh?
yeah, little payday yesterday.
Yeah, my greatest Father's Day sports memory is the championship that the Bulls won when Michael Jordan came back for his first full year, and he just broke down at midcourt, thinking about his father, took the trophy, went into the locker room, sprawled out on the floor of the locker room, crying like a baby, and those tears were all because his father was not there to witness it, and in dedication to his father, who he loves so much, and had such a big role in helping him become a superstar. He was his best friend, and that was a moment that I'll never forget. Great Father's Day.
That what's interesting, and it really just brought to my mind when you said that. So the 1986 season, the Bears we'd lost to the Bears in the playoffs from the year before, and the Bears go on and win Super Bowl 20 for the 85 Bears. Well, the next year was our year with the Giants, and we go on and win the Super Bowl. My dad died in May of 1986, and he was a young guy. He was only 66 years old. But had he still been alive, he would have gone to that Super Bowl, with me. And that was, and my mom didn't want to go. She just went over to my aunt and uncle's, and then I called her right after the game. And that was my first thought, that, he couldn't enjoy that with me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's gotta hurt. That tough. That's a tough one there. When you have a loved one who isn't there for one of the greatest successes of your life, that's definitely tough. But for everyone watching and everyone, I hope you had a great Father's Day. And if your father's no longer with us, then a special salute to you guys. All right, let's talk a little bit of football. Our main theme today is the successes that the Bears have had during the offseason, but also Greg has done some work on contracts for second-round players. Greg, I'll turn it over to you. What have you learned from some agents regarding the status of second-round contracts and guaranteed contracts? And maybe if you could start from, where are we with the ruling on that?
Well, there's only been 2 signed, the first 2. And we have talked about this before. And I said last week before, I go, this is going to take a while to get these guys done. And the reason being is, shortly after the draft, or, let's say within a month or even less than that, the first 2 contracts in the round were signed, and both guys got fully guaranteed contracts, 4-year guaranteed. So it's like a first-round contract. All first-round contracts are fully guaranteed. Now, what brought this really to mind and why I wanted to talk about it is on the new Chicago Sports Network, and I shouldn't say new, but it's new to if you have Xfinity, because it's only been on the air now for a couple of weeks, if that. But they were talking about David Haw and one of the other analysts, and they made it sound like these guys in the second round weren't getting guarantees, but they've been getting guarantees for a long time. Last year, almost every player in the round got at least 3 full years guaranteed. Now, all your draft choices get 4-year contracts. The first round guy gets a 4-year contract and a 5th-year option. It's at the option of the team whether he wants to pick that up. All the rest, second round through 7th round, get 4-year deals. Free agents could be are usually 2 or 3-year deals. But anyway, I made some calls this morning talking to some agents, and I wanted to get a feeling. And one guy's a younger agent said he thinks they all should get guaranteed all the way through the round. That's the way it should be. And I said, so I said right back to him, I said, yeah, I know you feel that way, but what's reality? And he thinks it could go pretty far. Well, I talked to another guy, very experienced guy, and who's been an agent well over 30 years. He thinks that the full 4-year guarantee will end right around, give or take a pick, the Bears' first pick in the second round, which is Luther Burden. So probably just after. He goes, now if you compare last year, you look at the contract that the 7th pick in the round got, he got part of that 4th year guaranteed, but not anywhere near to the whole the full 4th year being guaranteed. So he was going off on that, and then he started looking at, okay, where's there going to be a weak spot and where the league will attack it. And what he means is he thinks that somebody will try to get a deal done with an agent that they feel isn't as strong. And he gave me a team, and it's after the Bears pick. And I don't want to say that the player or the team or the agent, because that's not fair. But he said, that's the spot. And he found 2 other spots that, wait a minute, my wife is texting me here. I got to.
Sure. Absolutely. Let me I'll just remind
is
people that Luther Burden was the 39th overall pick. So that was 7 picks into the second round. So when the agent says that could be the cutoff, he's talking about 7, 8, 9, potentially 10 in terms of where those guaranteed contracts. That one agent is speculating that cutoff for guaranteed contracts could be around then. So that's kind of interesting. I personally feel that it could go even further. I know the players union will push for that, but please continue, Greg. If you're ready.
Well, so it's he thinks that, I said, how about 15? And he goes, 15 is not going to get a fully guaranteed contract. He goes, it'll be cut off before then. He goes, like I said, they'll find somebody that wants to get the deal done. And once they do that, then the dam breaks, and then the other agents got to kind of fall into place. But now, where Burden is he's the 7th pick in the round, 39th pick overall. He's going to be right on the edge of getting a full 4-year guarantee, or maybe 90% of it guaranteed, or something like that. But it's going to be. He's going to be right near the end, but that's really, this guy thinks that the break will come shortly after the Bears pick. And then it's going to be, make the negotiation a little bit easier. Now, I said to him, now, let me ask you this. I go, everybody's gone on vacation now. Is all this stuff going to wait until about a week before camp opens, and you're going to get a massive contract? Now get this, Aldo. Going into the weekend, there was only 10 picks outside the second round that were not signed.
Oh, wow.
30 guys in the second round and 10 others, and the rest of the draft's already signed their contract. Mm-hmm. So, it's just that round where the holdup is, and the holdup started with the first 2 deals.
Right.
So, but going back to the Chicago Sports Network, who's the one player they have on there as an analyst? It was a tight end.
Olsen?
Pardon?
Greg Olsen?
No. He played in the league. He's a local guy, but he played in the league. But anyway, he was saying, well, contracts don't mean anything in the NFL. He goes, I could sign a 10-year, $100 million contract. He goes, and it means nothing. He goes, they cut me, I get nothing. And when he was playing, part of that may have been true. You're always getting something. There are free agents, guys who sign undrafted free agent contracts. Some of them get as much as $250,000 of their first year. Mm-hmm. They get the signing bonus and say up to $250,000 of the first year guaranteed. Now, that's not everybody, but that might be the high point, guaranteeing $250,000 of the first year. So that's what's happened in the league. And first round picks, their whole contract's guaranteed. Second round, going into this year, at least 3 were guaranteed. And now you got the sticking point, but see, if you get it to the end of the second round, then the third round's going to want it.
Yeah.
And so the league is going to fight that. It's a worthwhile fight because of, guaranteed money versus non-guaranteed money, especially if the guy doesn't pan out, can be a big deal because then you got wasted cap money. But, I think in the end, like with Trapillo and Shamar Turner, they're not going to get fully guaranteed contracts. They're at 56 and 62 spots. That's where they were picked in the draft. And so, they're too far down the line. They will get at least 3 and probably some of 4, but they're not going to get a full 4. Burden, I would say that he's probably going to get the full 4. Based on this last conversation I had, and that only ended like 40 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So
Levante says that some of these podcasts are making it seem like the Bears have a problem with potential holdout with Luther Burden III. I believe this is an NFL problem more so than a team problem. Would you agree, Greg?
Yeah, it's it's a sticking point. And I've been saying this all along. As soon as I saw that, when those first two guys signed, I said, this is going to be a problem. And it could go in, it could mean that there are holdouts. So I specifically asked this one agent, do you think there will be holdouts? In fact, two out of the three I talked to, I said, do you think there'll be holdouts? Both of them said no. And the reason being is, and the one guy who was the least experienced, he goes, you're doing your client, especially a second rounder, a disservice by holding him out. He needs to be in camp. He needs to be practicing. So that was good to know. It's just, I don't think, well, to go back to what I started to say, it said a lot of these guys are on vacation, so you probably won't say anything for a month. But the one guy said, yeah, but the cap guys are working. He goes, they might not be working in the office, but they're working. And he goes, because I've already talked to a bunch. And so it's just a matter of getting the deal done. They have the info. I mean, everything's on, all the information's on a computer. You got your computer with you at home. You look it up, you have the conversation, you make a deal. So, but I don't see it happening this week or next week. I think it's going to take some time. And then they'll get done. It might be, Burden might not get done until the day before they get into camp or something like that. And I'm just, throwing a dart at the wall here. But there is some cause of concern. It's a situation where the league wants to protect themselves on guaranteed money for guys who didn't go in the first round. The agents, it's a good argument to have.
Mm-hmm.
The agents want the money.
Yes.
For the players.
And Skeletor brings up a really interesting point here. He says if the 40th pick gets a fully guaranteed contract, then Burden will probably hold out for a guaranteed deal himself. And that's probably true.
Burden's 39.
Right. So if the pick after him gets a fully guaranteed deal,
he has to get it. He's not going to get what the guy picked behind him.
Mm-hmm.
He's not going to accept. The agent's not going to accept less than that.
Can't blame him. Exactly. Cannot blame him. So I apologize here for my kind of stupid questions that are going to be followed. So the second rounder gets a 4-year contract, right?
All draft choices do. Undrafted, all draft choices get 4-year deals.
So even the 7th rounder.
Yes.
Okay.
The undrafted free agents get 2 or 3 year deals mostly.
Gotcha. Okay. So what if we are going to, because from the Bears standpoint, they are looking ahead, and the final year of Luther Burden's contract and all those second round picks is the contract year, the new contract year for Caleb Williams. And so they have to be thinking ahead in terms of what the projected salary is going to be in 4 seasons when Caleb $50, $60, $70 million a year contract is coming up. So could we see a situation where the NFL is going to start maybe telling reducing the amount of years of contracts for draftees, because these contracts for quarterbacks are just eating up so much of the cap?
Well, the cap is going to go up, and the 4-year deal rookies is a collective bargain agreement. That's bargained for. That's not going to change. Okay, it could change at the end of the deal. But the unions, if they're getting a 4-year deal now, they're not going to go to something less, especially when guys like in the second round now are starting to get fully guaranteed 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the part like with Caleb, Bears cannot talk to Caleb, and Caleb cannot talk to the Bears about a new contract until after he completes his 3rd year. So that we got a ways to go yet, because he hasn't even started year 2 yet. So he's got to play 2 full more seasons, and then going into that 4th year, if they so desire, they can begin talks on extending him.
Mm-hmm.
And then by give or take a couple of days around the 1st of May of that same year, so that offseason following his 3rd season, they've got to decide whether they're picking up the 5th year. Now, that all that means is that he's getting a 5th year at a guaranteed rate. It's another guaranteed money, and it depending on how much he played and where he stood in the draft, where he got picked, and in his case, he was first. That's going to be a lot of money. I mean, that's going to be well over $20 million.
Yeah.
That's okay. So, but then when you get in, first of all, you might not want to be hit, especially if Caleb pans out, because you always got to have that question. But, are you going to want to be hit with a 20-something plus $1 million cap hit, because that's all salary and no bonus tied in, versus let's do a deal and go out another 4 or 5 years and, throw in the bonus money and bring down the cap hit. So that makes it, part of the story. But don't forget, the cap money is still going to go up, and it's going to keep going up, and it's going to go up. I'm guessing, but I'm going to say I don't want to say leaps and bounds, but I think $20 million a year is a very feasible number.
I would agree with that. It's
especially because of all the gambling money that's now being put in, and now with the streaming rights that the NFL's doing, that is bringing a lot more money into the coffers, and the players are getting half of that money. So everything that goes on, all these international games, that's more money that pushes up the salary cap.
Yeah, I totally agree. $20 million is a feasible speculation for.
I'm probably light saying 20.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because you're absolutely right. The gambling stream.
I mean, it was 20. I think it was 20 this year.
Yeah, it was. And for the, before COVID, it was going up like about $10 million every year. And then there was a pause in the cap going up during COVID. And then right after, things got.
Actually, there was a little bit of a give back.
Okay.
Because teams lost money in COVID, and you had about, I don't remember the exact number, but I'm going to say 8 million or something like that, where it dropped down. And then it started gradually pulling up. And then last year that was the 23 offseason, going into the 24 season, there was a big jump. And then there's another big jump this year.
Yes, indeed. So, the Bears, though, have to be careful about that when it comes to that the 5th year of Caleb Williams' contract, because there's going to be a considerable jump in his salary if he progresses as we all expect.
Well, not just Caleb. You got other players too. You got, as they hit their contract year, and if these guys are panning out, they're going to want to get paid.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
They have, the league has meetings a few times a year anyway, where they're strictly going over cap numbers and projections. So the teams always have, and generally they're probably a little bit conservative, but conservative numbers going forward 3-4 years out, knowing what they think they're going to have. And generally there's a little bit more than that, but at least it gives them a baseline to figure out what they're going to do with this money and how they can, treat contracts, especially when you got you're going to have to pay a quarterback, probably going to have to pay a quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Some interesting thoughts here. Lee Bruin says league might have to look into position cap structures, maybe otherwise, because it's getting to be stupid money for quarterbacks. I mean, when you sign Daniel Jones to the type of contract he did with the Giants, that really retarded the progress of that franchise, because they were stuck with that contract for a couple of years.
Yeah, but they were backed against. In fairness, he had a real big season, and they were backed against the wall.
That is true.
I mean, you look at the numbers as compared to other quarterbacks, and don't forget the agent saying, "Well, why should I take cheaper? I got to get the same as the next guy's getting."
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be some interesting back and forth. Rick says, do you believe that a new rookie salary cap needs to be revisited? I would bet that that's something some owners are going to bring to the table, requesting that from the
that's
union.
all. I don't even know when this contract is up.
Yeah.
But that's something that is all part of the collective bargaining agreement. And that's way above us. And they're already, both sides are already looking at different things that they want. There was that one leak coming out of the what owners meeting was it? The May owners meeting, I think, that they said, they spent like one extra day talking nothing about finances, and that, the players are already getting 50%, but the money coming in is so great. Well, maybe the owners are going to want, now this is pro football talk, so it's Florio and he's always full of shit, but maybe the owners are going to push for 48 or 47%, to the players instead of 50. I can tell you right now, players aren't taking less than 50. They already got it.
Yep.
There won't be givebacks.
Yeah, there will not be. That is for sure. Levante has an interesting point. He says, I would think it would behoove the Bears to start talking to Caleb and his representatives. Caleb might do the Tom Brady thing with his new deal, which is take less money to give the team more cap space. Now, if Caleb starts to play at a superstar level, he's going to make hundreds of millions in endorsements. And so that is when I would think Caleb and his representatives might start thinking like Tom Brady did, because Tom Brady had a couple of Super Bowl championships and then started saying, yeah, I want to win more of these.
Yeah, but Tom Brady was in the league over 10 years before he started doing that.
That is true. Great point. Great point.
So, it was, let's do it for the good of the team. And who sent me a message? Wait a minute, I got another.
Got to check them messages. Could be important.
Well, that was from an agent. I lost my train of thought here.
Caleb Williams, 10 years.
Like in Caleb's case, I mean, he doesn't have a representative. They got advisors. But, all you got to do is go to the union. The union has all these numbers. And the union's going to say, these are the numbers that quarterbacks are getting. And so then you go from there. But I don't see them, Josh Allen always restructures his contract to help the team, and he takes, a big chunk of his salary and converts it into signing bonus. So that creates more cap space for the Bills, but he's not taking any less money. It's just how they're paying the money to him. But, if he wasn't such a great player, that could come back to bite him in the rear end. But he's, they don't have to worry about it with him because they know he's going to be around for the long haul.
Yeah, very interesting. And by the way, I just sent the message to TB17, who comes on here every day and just criticizes Caleb left and right. And I'm asking him politely, any chance you can come here and talk football and not troll, because there's some people just come in here just to throw firebombs, it's like,
I look at it this way, and I'm kind of speaking like Ben Johnson says here. Last year was last year. We knew last year was a total fuck up. Clusterfuck is probably a better word to use. And it didn't help anybody. Was it all on? Were there things on Caleb? Absolutely. And he owns up that. Was it all on him? Hell no. Okay, so now you've got a totally different coaching regime in there who approaches the game differently. And I think it's what he's going to do going forward. Forget about last year. It's fine. You can't change it. That's history.
Yep. Well, I went ahead and banned TB17 because he starts using, homophobic comments regarding Caleb and stuff, and that's just ridiculous. Come on, come in here and be an adult. This is an adult show, not for guys like you. Anyway,
are you sure? I mean, are you and I considered adults?
I couldn't think of anything smart to say. All right, I think we've covered that topic, but it is something we'll probably address further on down, particularly, if there really is a holdout. One last thing. Do you think that
what's the day they go to camp? Like the 23rd or 24th of July. So it's still, it's 5 weeks away. Today's the 16th of June. A little more than 5 weeks from whenever, the end of this week, and we'll find out then, and just go from there. Obviously, if you're going another 2 or 3 weeks and the nothing gets done, the media is going to say something, but like I said, a lot of guys are off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's vacation time.
It's vacation time, indeed. Do you think, though, that Luther missed the OTAs? It was reported that he had a soft tissue injury, but do you think that might have had something to do with the lack of contract?
No, not with a second round pick. There's only really one rookie in the whole league, and that's Shamar Stewart with Cincinnati. And that has to do with the money's set in stone, what he's going to get. What was he, the 17th pick?
Right.
The money's not going to change. What it's all about is what's the word I want?
Some language.
Trouble. Well, it's language if he gets in trouble and it just cancels off the contract, cancels off the guarantees of the contract. And in the case of a first round pick, that's the rest of the contract.
So that's an interesting thing, because I would side with the owners there. If you have a guaranteed contract with someone, there should be some safeguards. If the guy goes out and gets into trouble with the law or whoever, doesn't, to me, those guaranteed dollars should stop immediately.
No, I agree, and part of it is what Cincinnati is doing, and Cincinnati's being Cincinnati, is their first round pick last year, who was picked one pick later, I think 18 or something. They're trying to change that clause from what that guy got a year ago. And that isn't going to happen. So and no agent in his right mind is going to accept that. So he doesn't participate at all in the offseason program. He was there, and then during minicamp, he finally went home. But you can't fine him because he's not under contract for not being there. So,
right.
I think you look at the way Cincinnati, and I got a lot of respect for their organization, but some of the things they do, the Hendricks thing, why, they're taking care of the offense, but they don't want to take care of the defense. Well, guess what? Defense is what wins the freaking games.
Indeed.
And they got one of the best pass rushers in the league. Now, reportedly, the side started talking again over the weekend. Talking and getting a deal are two different things.
Right.
But at least they're talking.
Yeah, they've come a long way. And by the way, I apologize for the background noise. I know somebody in the chat said, what does Aldo have a woodpecker in his man cave?
They're hammering away in his house.
That's right. They're hammering away. I'm working the mute button as much as possible, so I apologize for the noise. I hope it's not too disruptive.
No, it doesn't. It's not bothering me. So it doesn't bother me.
Good. You're the most important person, because it was
I don't know about that. But.
Well, it's your show. It's your thoughts that people are coming on to hear. So absolutely. Again, great question here from D. Staron, and I would actually even extend the question. He asked, are player agents at all concerned about the game or making the game better? And then the same thing could be asked of the players union and even the owners. So let's tackle D. Staron's questions first. Agents, are they on all? You have great relationships with many agents. Do they talk to you about this is good for the game if we do this, or is their main interest, because it's a fiduciary concern? They got to get as much money for their players as possible. But do you ever hear them talk about the good of the game?
I think they all do. They all have that in their mind, because no game, no job.
Right.
So, but I mean, their job is to get the best deal, but the good agents get good deals, and it takes two sides. You got to have is the team being stubborn, or is the agent being stubborn, or are they both being stubborn? You could take the Cincinnati thing, and Cincinnati's being stubborn because there's already been a market set for edge players, using Hendrickson as an example. Well, I get what they're saying. They're saying he's going to be 31 years old before the season ends. So I don't want to go a 5-year deal. Okay. And supposedly he's turned down 3 years at a 28 million average. Well, looking at what some of the other edge players got, 28 isn't going to get it done. It's got to be north of 30.
Right. It's, to me, it's an interesting question. And I've always, thought that the players union should use that language more when they're presenting their sides, that they shouldn't just be thinking, they shouldn't be, at least from a public relations standpoint, talking solely about the players' interest. They should also remind fans that they are in negotiations for the good of the game as well. Whether that's true or not,
some of the things where I disagree with the union is, okay, the other thing that came out, they want all grass fields. Okay. There's some stadiums that you can't put grass in. Now there are some dome stadiums that have grass fields because you can wheel in and out the thing, but that's at a huge cost when they constructed the stadium.
Right.
And so, how feasible is it? And you're looking at the cost. Let's use the Bills, for example. They're not even putting a dome on that stadium. And the original projected cost was 2.1. And, the state gave them, I don't know, 800 million or something like that. And of the 2.1, but anything over and above 2.1, that's on the Bills to pay, Terry Pagula to pay. Well, guess what? They're already past that 2.1. It's going to be more like 2.5, 2.6 when it's all done. And it won't be done for another year. So that's a lot of money that comes right out of the owner's pocket.
That's very true. Some of the demands the players union makes, cost money for the owners, and so that has to be factored into negotiations. No doubt about it. All right. Again, we will talk about this topic more as the offseason goes on, but let's now turn our attention to the major theme of this show, which is the successes that the Bears have had during the offseason. I know Jim Richels, who is a Lions fan, is going to say, oh, here we go again. The Bears are the offseason champions this season. Yeah, they are. And so eventually it's going to pay off on the football field. And part of the reason is because of who Ryan Poles brought in as head coach. But that message
I'm just going to put a little caveat on that, only
Please.
Because we assume based on that. But reality is he still hasn't coached one game as a head coach.
Absolutely. Totally agree. But
everything is going in the right direction.
Right. Yes.
But until we see the actual product, and I like the way he handles the team. I like how there's already been a change in culture, and that the players know there's things they got away with last year that they can't get away with anymore. I mean, they publicly say it. So, like DJ Moore, I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I'm not going to talk about, it's like, no, I've been told to keep my mouth shut, and I'm keeping my mouth shut.
Absolutely. That to me is up there in the top 5 things that has improved with this football team during the off season is the culture change about keeping things in house. Even the things as little as the body language thing. which, as a fan, I was embarrassed, with the body language that some of the players exhibited. It's just not portraying a winning type mentality. If you're got slumped shoulders, or if you're laying on the bench because you're being hit by a defensive lineman and so forth, if you're doing that, where really is your mind? Is it about getting up and fighting back and being strong? You know what it takes to win in the NFL, Greg. You have that mentality. But if the players are visibly showing us that they are kind of giving up mentally, there's just no chance for a great comeback. There's no
it's
chance
giving
to
up
succeed.
mentally and giving up physically. I mean, when your mind gives up, you're giving up.
Mm-hmm.
So, but some of it, body language can be a lot. But let's take yesterday as an example, and we're getting to a different sport. Or we see a guy who won had really, I think it was the second hole or third hole. He had a really drastic misfortune in that hole. He hits a really good shot to the pin, but the ball hits the green, bounces, and hits the pin. I don't know if you saw the replay of this. That ball rolled 50 yards off the green just because of an inch that it, where it ricocheted off the pin, where had it missed the pin, he probably would have been within 10 feet. So he ends up bogeying the hole where he could have very well been putting for birdie. And, you watched him, they had the camera on him, and he's just watching the ball come back to him. His face, the look on his face never changed. You could have seen something like, oh, fuck, and
yeah.
You've seen guys do that.
Sure.
They get so frustrated. Nothing changed. It's like, okay, now I got to play it from there.
That's huge. Now I don't blame a guy if he's going to, get upset and swear and stuff. But I think that, because that shows your competitive spirit. But you gotta, it's the old cliche in football, forget the last play, right? Whether it's a successful play or bad play, you gotta be totally focused about the next shot on the golf course, the next play on the football field, et cetera, et cetera. And I think
we use the term short memory.
Memory.
And with some players, it's more important than others. Corner, you got to have a short memory. You get beat for a TD, you can't dwell on it. You got to play the next down because they beat you this last down. They're coming after you again now. So you got to make up for it. And the same thing, with the quarterback. You can throw a horrible interception, turns into a pick six or something, and you got to be able to bounce back. You can't dwell on it. Forget about it. On to the next play because you still got to try to win the game.
Absolutely. All right, let's start at the top, Greg. And if I was, at the top as far as the general manager goes, what during the off season did Ryan Poles do that most impressed you as perhaps his biggest off season move?
I think the overall overhaul of the offensive line.
Okay, you agree with that?
And the way he did it was, I thought that was really cool the way he did it because I think he looked at, I'm going to say 3 weeks, at the combine, 3 weeks before free agency starts, 2.5 weeks before free agency starts. I don't think he thought those trades were there. And that, he was going to have to spend money in free agency to, revamp the entire offensive line. But then the trades became available. And the first thing that and having worked at Kansas City, I think it helped him was that when Kansas City put the franchise tag on Trey Smith, right away, he's like, they can't afford Tooney. They're going to have to do something here. And so he's the guy who initiated the call.
Yeah.
And I can't get Smith, but I'll take the guy who actually might have had a better season, even though he's on the downside of his career as far as number of years left, and get a deal done. And really, when you look at the money that they would have had to give Trey Smith versus giving up a 4th round pick and the money that Tooney got, that was a win.
Yeah.
A win for the Bears. And the same thing with Jackson. I was kind of critical of that because, Jackson did not play very well at LA, but they got the guy who had him for the 2 previous years. Mm-hmm. And when he was a Pro Bowl player in Detroit. So because you have that relationship and you know what he was, and you're just anticipating, hey, he had a bad year, he switched, it wasn't a good move. Sometimes the grass isn't greener on the other side. I know what he was. I know what kind of person he is. I've already lived with him. We can bring him in and we can, expect a winner. And then, your big ticket then was getting the center, who was the best center available in free agency. So they did it all, but they did 2 of it with trades.
Mm-hmm. That, I was just actually looking up to see what the difference was. Trey Smith, he's got almost $24 million guaranteed to him in this 1-year contract that he signed with the Chiefs.
That's the franchise tag. Have they redone that deal yet to extend him yet?
Not according to what I'm seeing here from Spotrac.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
And then Joe Tooney is getting guaranteed $33 million guaranteed, but that's over 3 seasons. So to me, the Bears got a great deal by going for the proven future Hall of Famer and Joe Tooney.
Well, they look at the average too. Although, the average, I think, with Tooney's contract was like $17 million.
Yeah.
He's 32 years old. And you got to figure the age part in. And talking to the agent who did the deal is a good friend of mine. It was, that Tooney was happy with the deal. So let's do this. Let's take this. And that's part of the thing. As long as the guy's happy.
Yep, exactly. You don't want a player who is unhappy with his contract starting for you at the offensive line. That is for sure. So you look at the offensive line and what Ryan Poles did as perhaps his biggest achievement this offseason, attacking that interior offensive line.
Yeah, I thought it was. And then, I think they wanted competition at tackle. They went out and got one in Ozzie Trapillo. So that'll be that whole scenario, which won't play out until camp, will be very interesting because you're going to have 3 guys competing for one job, theoretically one job at the left tackle spot. And part of that has to do with, when is Braxton going to be ready? He could be ready to go day one. He may not be ready to go day one. And really, depending what his status is, will have a lot to say. Let's say he's got to miss a week and a half. Well, that means you're going into game week on the first preseason game, and he hasn't taken snaps yet. And you got to start to try to get this thing together. This is going to be my line for the year.
Right.
So I think that whole story, which hasn't played out yet, is going to be one of the most interesting things to watch in camp, is how that plays out.
What about the depth of the offensive line? So we know there's depth at the left tackle position. What we're hoping for is out of that depth, a left tackle will emerge.
Well, somebody will be a swing.
Right. So, Karana Magaje perhaps could play, that right tackle position if he doesn't win the starting job. And we know that Ozzie can play that right tackle position. So that's good news. What about the interior of the offensive line? I'm actually a big fan of Bill Murray.
I am too.
limited time that we saw him play, the hustle and bravado that he plays with is fantastic. But do we have somebody that can snap the ball if Drew Dahlman, God forbid, I shouldn't even say this, gets hurt?
Well, they drafted my man Luke Newman.
Yes,
to play center,
which we don't talk enough about. But go ahead, please.
So it was funny. Did you watch when they did the 1920 football drive and the draft feature that came out a couple weeks ago, and they got to taking Newman and then Cunningham kind of teases Poles and goes, "You've been talking about this guy forever," but it's a guy he wanted. He had, he went into the draft saying, "This is the guy I want, and I'm going to get him, and I'm going to get him at the right time." But he's, I've done a lot of tape on him. He's a solid player. The center position is going to be new to him. That's not unusual in the National Football League. There's a lot of guys playing center in the league that were guards in college. And he did play some center at the East-West. Granted, it was just an all-star game, but he did do it, and he showed he could do it. But you got him. You've still got Ryan Bates, who really on most teams would be a pretty good backup. He started better than 2 years in Buffalo on playoff caliber teams, playing both center and guard, more guard than center. But we also know he's got an arthritic shoulder. How much of an effect is that going to have on him? Now, we stated before, he went down to Panama, I think it was, and got stem cell treatment and came back saying it was a lot better. But what we don't know is how long will it be better for? I don't think anybody has the answer to that. And so that part will be interesting. And then you got Murray. And you got to see how the rest plays out in camp. For some of these young guys, they have the one kid, the Canadian kid that they signed as a free agent. He was the best Canadian lineman a year ago. Theo Benedict. That's a guy they really like. They had him on the practice squad last year. Is he going to challenge for a spot this year? Now, generally speaking, you're going to keep 9 offensive linemen on the 53. Now, if there's somebody they really like, maybe they go to 10. But that, we're not going to find that out until, the last week in June.
Greg, let's get
or
back
last week in July, rather.
Yeah, let's get back to Bates just for a moment here, because we know that Ryan Poles was really hot for this guy, tried to acquire him a couple of seasons ago, maybe it was 3 seasons ago, and then finally lands him, and he signs this contract where the
contract he signed was the contract. You're talking Bates, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, the contract he has is the contract that the Bears offered him a contract in free agency 2 years ago.
That's right.
Okay, and the Bills matched the contract. This is the final year of that deal.
Yes.
Okay, it was a 4-year, $16 million contract, so 4-year. Mm-hmm. He's already been paid $500,000. Part of that was due with the first couple of days of the league year. He got his roster bonus of $500,000. So if he's not here, there's a $3.5 million cap savings. None of the rest of that is guaranteed. He's got to make the team. But if he's on the roster first game, that's guaranteed for the rest of the year because he's a vested vet.
Interesting. So the fact that Bates is currently today, as of June 16th, still on the team, does that tell us that the Bears still have confidence in him, or would they have, released him from his contract and looked elsewhere to fill in that depth piece?
My honest opinion on that is they want to see what he can do when once contact starts. Is he still having a problem with his shoulder?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's
okay. So then, if in fact he is, they can release him, and they'd have to do an injury settlement then. But still, the injury settlement isn't going to be $3.5 million. So but I think that one still has to play out. Now, could they theoretically go into camp and say, you know what, we don't even want to take the chance and move on before camp starts? Yeah, that could happen. I mean, well, but that still has to play out. We just don't know. You're guessing.
Our Bears fan from Florida asks, Greg, what do you think about these players like Pickens and Bates being out for OTAs, and does he see them cutting any of them? Well, you've talked before about Pickens.
I don't know if Bates was out for the whole thing. They didn't say who was participating and who wasn't participating.
Yeah.
And the media was there very few days. They were there for all three of the mini camp days, but they got one viewing a week on the OTAs. Pickens had a soft tissue injury. He's got to shit or get off the pot. And even though he was a third round pick, there's nothing guaranteed. They drafted a guy. They signed a guy in free agency and Grady Jarrett. He's got his work cut out for him.
Okay, I wanted to talk about some of the other success stories, and I know we opened the show talking about Luther Burton's contract, but to me, acquiring this guy who was slotted as a first-round caliber wide receiver, acquiring him in the second round, to me is a huge win for the Chicago Bears, and what this guy can do once he gets the ball in his hands is just astronomical. Your thoughts on Luther Burton?
No, I really like him. His after the catch ability is excellent. He's returned punts. He timed 4.41, I believe, but he actually looks like he can play faster than that because he's got such a good burst. Mm-hmm. And I think his after the catch, it's not as good as Neighbors last year. From LSU, who the Giants took in the first, but I don't want to say it's a close second, but it's a second, but it's pretty damn good, and there's been people that compare him to coming out of college to DJ Moore, and I think that is a good comparison. They're actually the same size and speed coming out of college, 6 foot. They're about 208. 4.41. They ran the same one. I think DJ ran 4.42. Might have been 4.41. Same weight. DJ looks a little heavier than that, but he's been in the league a little longer, so he probably built up some. But when you look at the style of play and going back to DJ in college, it is very similar.
It is indeed. It is indeed. And thank you, Maddie, for the $2 donation to the bar room. Really appreciate that. And thank you, Evie, for letting people know that they should smash that like button. Really appreciate that from both of you and everyone in attendance watching live. So Luther Burton, to me, I have high expectations for him immediately. I mean, this guy, even if he gets 2 or 3 touches a game for the first several games, any one of those touches could end up being an explosive play. Do you remember when Ben Johnson said during a press conference, the tush push, yeah, it's fine, but I prefer explosive plays. And I immediately thought Luther Burton third.
Well, they've got a lot of guys that can make plays. There's only one ball, and there's only so many players that can be on the field at some time. I mean, you drafted a move tight end in the first round, and we got to go back and touch this. He does not play the same position as Cole Kmet. Yeah, when you do the tight end thing, they're the same position, but one is more of a Y, and the other one's more of a flexed out H-back type thing who could even play some wide receiver. But he can run. He can run after the catch. He's got a huge catch radius. He's a good route runner. So, I mean, he's going to bring something to the table that they haven't had because he's more athletic than Cole. He's faster than Cole, but he's never going to block like Cole. That just isn't going to happen. But there's going to be a lot of situations where you got them both on the field. And he can be a a mismatch nightmare because of his size. Now, if you got them both on the field at the same time, that means you only got 2 receivers in the game, unless you take out a running back.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and that's a situation where go back and little things that people don't necessarily catch on to, but I caught it when Ben said it. Well, he can play some, meaning Luther Burden. Well, he can play some running back too. So that's a situation where you could play with 2 tight ends, the 3 wide receivers, with that 3rd wide receiver being a running back and or something else. So there's a lot of things you can do. I mean, he's just having fun playing with all this, and figuring out how he's going to use it. But same time, theoretically, you're going to have some guys that have had a lot of touches, and they're not going to get as many touches because there's so many good skill players.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be something that's difficult to deal with down the road. And, we won't know it. And if they win, maybe there's never a problem, because winning takes care of everything.
Indeed. If you are winning and you get a player who's complaining about getting the ball, then he's not right for the team, because then his main objective isn't about winning, it's about me. And you got to be about we when you're a part of a football team. All right, other successes, and I'm asking everyone in the chat room, please share what is your favorite success story of the off season. But we haven't talked enough in previous shows, but we haven't talked enough about Ben Johnson and the creativity that he brings to this offense. You just mentioned it because he's got certain pieces and so forth, but this guy truly does seem like he could become the Bill Walsh of this generation, the Sean McVay of yesterday. He could take that mantle as one of being the most creative or most creative head coach in football. And innovation is something that I love to see in my leaders, in my coaches, whether it's the Buddy Ryan's 46 defense, whether it's the T formation that George Halas presented. That's important. And I just have a gut feeling that Ben's going to bring some new things into pro football that are going to be really exciting. Do you get that sense, Greg?
Yeah, but it still has to play out. And I'm not trying to cut the enthusiasm down on it, but like I say, yeah, it's there to happen, but it has to happen. And I think people think that they're going to come out of the block smoking, and I'm not so sure that's because everything's new and you got a lot of new players, and so it's not going to be probably as smooth as people want. I heard Ben say something the other day. He said, it might take a half a season, and he's right. So there's got to be, the fans got to be in tune with that. They got to realize that this isn't going to happen in 1 day or 2 days, and how much they can load on these players at any given time remains to be seen, because we don't know that, how everything comes together. I mean, they've only had X amount of practices in the off season. They haven't had any hitting. And I don't think, they might have a playbook, but how that playbook is for an actual game and what it looks like right now could be 2 different things. Now, it's going to change literally game to game, because you're going to tinker with things and you're going to want matchup situations that favor you. So you're going to go into one. I mean, you could have a game where, predominantly DJ is playing as a slot receiver or something, and another game where he's outside, and another game it could be Rome is playing as a slot, and another game he's outside. So we don't know how that's going to happen. And he probably doesn't know how that's going to happen. He's got an idea in his head, but until he actually sees it working when they're going full go and practice, and then in the preseason, then he's going to get a better idea of what he can and can't do. We might see some stuff in preseason you don't normally see, just to try it out.
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think you'll see plays, but not a game plan.
Yeah, I agree with you. And 6 weeks is a realistic speculation about when the offense will start to flourish or work at a kind of clockwork manner. But I still expect to see points being scored in those early games just because of the element of surprise. When we face the Vikings on Monday Night Football in week 1, I think that Ben's going to have some things up his sleeve that's just going to surprise the heck out of that aggressive Vikings defense. I at least, again, this is the hopeful season. My hopes are so sky high.
I get it. And the way I look at it, and Flory's isn't an idiot. He knows it too. But in their preparation, they're going to be looking at Detroit tape and get the tendencies that Johnson had in Detroit, because that's all they got to go on. So that's what he's got to do. But now he's got a different quarterback. He's got different players. It's a different team. So what he did in Detroit may be totally different to how he calls the game here in Chicago.
Yeah.
And that's the element of surprise that you're talking about, because Minnesota and Flores can prepare for the game, but are they really preparing the right way?
Indeed. And, another, I'm in a really hopeful mood today, but another player that I have high expectations for in 2025 is DeAndre Swift, because of his connection with Ben Johnson. The fact that the Bears didn't put more of an onus on acquiring another running back early in the draft, in a draft that was loaded with lots of different running backs, I think tells me that DeAndre Swift, they're comfortable with him being their number one back. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, and especially because you could look at the fan and the media saying, no, they got to get another running back. Well, just take the last 2 weeks as an example, or last week. Chubb was a name mentioned by the media and the fan base as a guy. He signed with Houston. And you know what? They signed him for nothing, $2.5 million or something like that. The other name was the former Charger. What's his name? Dobbins. He signs with Denver the end of last week for nothing. Another like $2.5 million deal or something. Bears could have done either one of those deals. They chose not to. And that tells me anyway, that we're happy with what we have. You got to turn your mic on, buddy.
There you go. First miss of the day. It tells me that they're happy with what he can do after he's got the ball in his hands. All they need to give him is some blocks. And I've got these highlights running as we're talking here, and just see the explosiveness that he has, and he's got an eye to get into the end zone once he gets past those linebackers. And if you give him blocks, he gets there. He look at the pause there, the blocking there, and just takes control of that hole, hits it, and gets all the way to the end zone. I got high hopes for Swift.
Well, and then you've got Roshan, coming back off an injury-riddled year 2. He should be back to where he was as a rookie, and you got Manungai, who I think is one of the steals of the draft.
I love that Ben Johnson singled him out when he was asked, some of the best players in the OTAs, and that was refreshing that Ben Johnson actually named names, and Manungai was one of them. Good stuff.
Well, and that means he had to literally jump out.
Yeah, hammer time at my house, Jim. Indeed. getting some work done over at the house here. All right, we need to talk about the defense. And somebody said that they were also impressed with what Poles did with the defensive line. And I know a lot of people are still saying we need a pass rusher, we need a pass rusher. But that can't be that high of a priority for this team because they have high expectations for the players already on this roster, right, Greg?
Well, they signed Deo and gave him some pretty good money. And Deo can play outside or inside. And again, and this tells me a lot. They had opportunities during the draft several times to take edge players, and they didn't do it. And part of it could have been they weren't as high on the board as other people had them or whatever. But I think that they think that Booker is going to take a step in year 2. If he doesn't, then yeah, you could have some problems. Now what they have done is they've improved the interior pass rush dramatically between Jarrett and Shamar Turner, and now you've got Gervon Dexter coming back, going into his 3rd year, and he had a pretty good 2nd year. So and he's worked on his body even more. So, it's going to be interesting. But if you can get a really strong interior pass rush, that helps the outside pass rush.
Indeed. And with Dennis Allen's defense, he's not afraid to blitz those linebackers. Do you think that's going to help get more production out of Tremaine Edmonds? A lot of people have been asking me, does Edmonds under Dennis Allen, are we going to see a better linebacker from Tremaine Edmonds?
I mean, that remains to be seen. And I keep saying that, but it's because, they've only been playing fake football so far. They haven't played real football yet. There has been talk that he might be playing Will and flip-flop him. And, with EJ. And I kind of like that thought myself. There were times going back to his days in Buffalo where he'd line up outside and come, as a pass rusher. And he's a pretty good pass rusher. Some linebackers who blitz just don't have a knack for it.
Right.
And there's other guys that do. They know how to use their hands and whatever. And he's one of those guys. He can be a weapon. You just don't do it all the time. You got to pick and choose when you're going to do it. So, yeah, I think they've got some weapons there. Safety is a concern for fans. I don't think it's a concern for the coaching staff or the front office, only because, again, they had opportunities to get guys who were decent players for very little money. They said no. And to me, that says a lot.
And Greg, these next few weeks, everybody's off, but Ben did talk about he's going to get some work done, and I'm sure some of the other coaches are going to get some work done. Is there a chance that they will be looking at the preseason, at the OTA tape and mandatory minicamp tape, and they come to an agreement, yeah, maybe we do need some help at a certain position, whether it's the backup defensive lineman or a backup safety or what have you. Does that, and the question is, does that OTA mandatory minicamp tape sometimes expose needs?
Yes and no, because it's not, especially along the line, it's not live.
Right.
So you're not getting a real look. But in answering your question, if they felt they needed somebody, that decision's already been made. Because, they were going to, the rookies finished up last week. Coaches were there probably through the end of the week and meeting. And then they're going to be off. Could they be in there today? They could be, but I'm going to suspect that they're off. And, they're going to be gone the next 4 weeks. Now, if a guy wants to come in on his own, that's fine, but you're not going to have the group's not going to get together until probably 3 or 4 days before camp opens up. That's just the way it is.
J2K has been doing a lot of work watching all 22 film to learn more about Dennis Allen and Ben Johnson. And we're going to have him on a future show so he can share some of his learnings with us. Now, J2K asks you, Dom Robb has received a lot of praise this offseason. Ben and recently Tyson Bagent have gotten praise. Have you seen a player go from fringe roster spot to potential contributor this under the radar?
I think you see it happen a lot. You've got a new staff, so you've got the coaches look at them differently. Okay, now one thing Robinson could do was play the run. Okay, he wasn't a very good pass rusher, but when he was in there, the defensive run, he was pretty damn good. He's got the size that if you look at past Dennis Allen defenses, he's got some of the size he prefers to have outside. Does that mean he's going to be here? No, he's still got to, once the pads come on, turn that into production. And he's got to improve as a pass rusher. Now, this guy, go back. This guy was a wide receiver for part of his career in college.
Yeah.
And so he's got athleticism. But pass rushing is just, putting everything together. You can learn the little parts, but you got to put it together. And I think that's where, he was kind of treading water, and that he couldn't put he could play the run, couldn't put the pass rush part together. Now he's going into year 4. It's like Pickens. You got to do it or you're going to be gone. The traits are the natural traits are there. Has he gone through enough of the learning process to have traits turn into actual production?
I agree, by the way, with Jigsaw, who says he thinks that Dominic Robinson should have had more playing time last season. I mean, he had an excellent camp in 2024. His preseason production in those exhibition games, it was impressive. And then when the season started, he didn't even dress for.
Well, look at the wide receiver last year. What do you have? 10 catches in the last preseason game?
Yeah.
And he wasn't dressing for like the next 6 weeks.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's one of the confusing things I think with that staff last year is that we saw some production, but there was a burr up somebody's ass in the coaching staff, because the coaching staff decides who plays, not Ryan Poles. And for whatever reason, those guys weren't playing. And did they not like what they could do or rather go with other guys? I don't know. But with new people this year, you're seeing some positive things, or they're saying positive things. Mm-hmm. Now we got to see if that turns into actual positive things once camp opens up.
Indeed. J2K is asking about Zach Pickens. He hasn't practiced yet. No word on why. Is there an injury concern?
There's supposed to be a soft tissue thing. But I'm not going to say he hasn't practiced, because the media is not there. They don't tell you. You are under no obligation to say who practices and doesn't practice during this time of the year. Right. You don't have to give an injury report on anybody until the first game of the season.
Right.
So he could have very well practiced 10 practices, and we wouldn't know about it. He just wasn't practicing when the media was there.
At one of those open media sessions, Pickens was on the practice field, but left halfway into the practice, perhaps to get some work done. It's a big mystery. And as Greg has said now for months, Pickens is on the bubble. He's got to start showing some stuff.
Well, you just look at the depth chart. And, generally speaking, you keep 4 DTs. They could keep 5, but they really, if you count Dale as a guy who can play both, then he would be the 5th, because you've got Turner, Billings, Dexter, and Grady Jarrett. That's 4, and those 4 are going to be there. So your 5th could be Dale, because he can go inside and outside. So where's that leave Pickens?
Devin Duvernay was added to this team, and apparently his role is going to be returning kicks.
No, he's been a 2-time Pro Bowler, or better be.
2-time Pro Bowler. So how important is his addition? I mean, could this be one of those under-the-radar additions to this team that he could make such a big influence that we could be, heralding him as a special teams player of the year kind of guy?
Well, the kickoff part has changed so much. He had some pretty good kickoff returns, but that was under the old rules.
Right.
That's changed dramatically, but he's a good punt returner too.
Mm-hmm.
I think to have somebody back there that is going to handle the ball, it's going to get some yards, and has the ability to make the first man miss and get a big return, that helps. But, he isn't terrible as a receiver. He's a pretty good receiver.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of depth. See, the way I look at it, this team at some positions has so much depth that if people stay healthy during camp, they could pick up some late draft picks at the 53 cutdown time.
That is true. And we're being asked, does he have a chance to potentially be the number 4 wide receiver, or is that going to go to I'm going to try to pronounce the name. Zemakaitis, the free agent from Washington?
I think they would be going into camp. They would be 4 and 5. But actually, reality is Burden going into camp. Burden's going to be 4 or 5 because he didn't do much in the off season. But yeah, no, they've played in the league. Let me look at the wide receiver roster here. You got a big guy who hadn't done anything in the league in Miles Boykin. And then there is, there's a guy who played at Green Bay who was on the practice squad last year, Toure. And then the guy I liked, the free agent signing that I liked, didn't say anything about him during the OTAs and minicamp, was Ja'Day Walker from Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big receiver who can run. He's a 4.45 guy who is 6'3", 6'2.5", 200 pounds. And he can play special teams. So receiver, generally you keep 6.
Mm-hmm.
So who are those? Now 6 don't dress on Sunday.
Right.
But 4 and 5 got to be special teams players.
Exactly.
And Duvernay is one of those.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And who was it they were talking about? Somebody is really good at being a gunner, one of these acquisitions. Maybe it was the kid from Washington. I forgot. But when we talk about have to be good at special teams, it goes beyond catching the ball and running with it. It's about being able to tackle, being able to play that gunner position, being able to block, and so forth. So many different roles in special teams. Bears have to have a good contingent of players to do that job. All right, let us focus our attention now on one other aspect of improvement that I think that this football team has done in 2025, and that is just the growth from Ryan Poles. One of the things, Greg, that he said that he's learned from his 3 seasons as being the general manager is to focus more on potential things that could go wrong. So, for instance, last year they had 8, 9 captains, but they didn't teach those guys how to be captains, and they put a focus on that this year. Poles mentioned that he was reading the book that was helping him address that issue about seeing potential potholes before they're potholes. And so that to me is a great attribute for a general manager to have, not to just be focused on turning out fires when they're appear, but also turning out those fires before they've even become a kindle, so to speak. So what have you seen from Poles? What have you heard about Poles that gives you promise that this guy truly is growing into becoming a top-notch GM?
Well, he's learning, and he made some mistakes. Every GM does. He made a mistake. His first big trade was for Chase Claypool. First of all, the player wasn't the right player, and he overpaid, giving up a second. That's on him, but it was a learning mistake, and it's not an easy job. It's a hard job, especially if you don't have a good team, and you're trying. And he comes in with a brand new head coach that I don't care what they say. He picked him. He didn't pick him. That was Bill Polian's coach. But he had to go with that. So you had 2 rookies learning together. Now you got a rookie again and Ben Johnson, but Ryan's in the 4th year on the job, and he's gone through situations, he's gone through negativity, and you learn from that negativity. And he's got some good mentors. But, I go back to one thing Jerry used to say. Because Jerry, spent a lot more time in the league than Ryan did when Jerry got the job. But after he had the job for a little while, he said, he looks at me and he says, the one thing I didn't anticipate? He goes, when they knock on your door, 95% of the time it's bad news. And you got to go through that to know it. They're not knocking on the door to come on and tell you they won the lottery.
That's right. You should have seen that block from that kid. No, it's usually about this guy can't block.
No, it's fires that you got to put out.
Yeah,
It could be fires within the building that you got to put out. You got to manage. You're managing a lot of different things. It's not just the football players, it's the strength coaches, the food people, the video people, the analytics people. You got to manage a whole lot of different areas within the football operations department.
The HR department knocking on the door and then saying, we got a problem with one of our coaches.
Yeah.
That happened a couple of times. Yeah, it definitely, the job is much more than just football. And I think that is perhaps, hopefully, where he has gotten better. D. Starren says, I think that Poles has done a better job than Pace. They attacked building a team in 2 totally different ways. Pace was always trying to find a winner this season. Poles has taken a much more methodical approach to building a team. Do you have a preference, Greg? If you were going to join an organization, would you try to find answers to winning now, or would you prefer to tear it down and build it up?
Well, when you do what Ryan Pace did, you're valuing the players that you currently have a little bit too highly, and you're going out to find these final pieces, and the final pieces cost a lot of money, and you're paying them a lot of money, and they're getting long in the tooth, and so it just doesn't work out. It comes back to haunt you, and that's exactly what happened. He over-evaluated Mitchell Trubisky. I mean, we all know that. You wanted the guy to do good. He didn't. He's a backup in the league, and he might be a backup in the league for another 3-4 years, and make a hell of a living. $2.5, $3.5, $4 million a year, but he's never going to lead anybody to the promised land. And there was 2 other quarterbacks, one that's one of the all-time greats in Patrick Mahomes, and the other started off his career great, and then because of his own misgivings, got sidetracked, and that's Walker, who's now with Cleveland. But you look at his first 3 years in Houston, he was an outstanding player.
Mm-hmm.
But Trubisky hadn't touched either one of those as far as overall play on the field before Walker got into all his problems.
Sorry for that noise. I thought it was a police officer coming in. I don't know if you heard that.
Well, I heard that. What was it?
It's a saw. He's laying down a new flooring for the dining
Oh,
room, so
okay.
he's cutting wood. I got startled by it. I thought it was a police siren.
They're coming to get you.
They're coming to get me finally. I've gotten away for so long. All right. If there are no final questions, let me take a quick look here. Chris Watts had a question early on in the show. Greg, what's the biggest changes you have seen in NFL training camps over your years?
Lack of physicality.
Yeah.
It was, when I started, there was 2-a-days almost every day for at least a month. 2 weeks when you first got there, and you're always doing 2-a-days. And you'd be doing 2-a-days 2 days before a preseason game and banging the hell out of each other because the game didn't mean anything. You weren't trying to, and that, doing away with 2-a-days and taking away a lot of the contact that you have in the single practice and taking away just about all contact during the regular season, I think has changed the game dramatically.
There's no doubt about that. And, there were, of course, fewer games than 12 games during the season. So you could
we always, my whole time in the league, we've had 16.
Really? Wasn't there a time? Well, when did the 14?
Or maybe we had 14 for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But we had 6. Yeah, started off, we had 14 and 6 preseason games, which is freaking crazy. And then you went to 16 and 4. 6 preseason games was crazy. But now we can spend a minute or two talking about why.
Yeah.
First of all, nobody was making money like they are right now. A lot of these guys had second jobs,
right.
and there was no off-season program. The off-season programs were just starting to go as far as everybody having a weight room and the players coming in on their own, 40 years ago, 42 years ago. And then now for some people listening, they're probably saying, that's older than me. Well, it's still not that long ago and then coaches started taking advantage of that. Well, I got the players here. Let's go out on the field a little bit. So there was no set off-season program. There was just, they came in 4 days a week to lift. It was the coaches that took it a step further and said, let's go out on the field and do some 7-on-7. And then let's do this. And then let's do that. And then the union started getting involved and controlling it. But they keep, from what it started off, there used to be like 16 OTAs. Now there's not. They've backed off on that.
Yep.
And they backed off tremendously on the training camp. And again, it's because players didn't train. When the whole reason for double sessions, a lot of it, football things are tradition involved, but it's because players weren't in shape. So they had to come to camp to get in shape because they were doing whatever. And so camp was longer and you had to get them ready. And now it's like, you got these guys they're ready to go day one.
Yep.
They weren't working at Chase Bank the week before as a teller. I mean, their job is to be ready to play day one.
D. Stern says, in Vikings, they would have didn't they have countless practices?
It says contactless practices.
Contact. Okay. My bad.
I can't tell you what the Vikings did. I've never been up there to see it. I know when like with Parcells, with Dan Reeves, even with Jim Fossil, we had physical practices all the time. And in fact, I remember coming here, Dick Duran was the head coach. So this is 2001, and we're up in Platteville, my first year. And it was like, Jerry, this is a freaking country club, compared to what we were doing in New York.
Yeah. And I'm with Ramsey here. Ramsey says that he really likes the preseason, and because you get to see younger players that you saw in college, which you won't see in the regular season. So his question for you is, why not expand? Why doesn't the NFL have like a farm league?
Well, they did, which was NFL Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But NFL Europe was costing a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So the owners decided we don't want to spend that money.
Right.
So that money was all coming out of the NFL's pocket, that whole league.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's been people trying to get things going right now. The UFL is the closest. They've had 4 seasons. We got interrupted because of COVID. It's really knocked out 3. But I know in that first season, before COVID hit, we were already talking to people in the NFL of, trying to work out something, assuming that it was going to work, and it was working at that point, and then COVID hit, that, can the NFL send us some players? Maybe like each team sends us 4 players, that type of thing. And then COVID hit and it all went away. And, part of the thing, though, with the league sending players is the league's got to pay for those players. And what if they get hurt?
Yep.
Well, who's going to handle that type of situation? But I do think that having the spring league, I think the UFL, we did it right with the XFL. We started, our first game was the week after the Super Bowl. And we would have been done had we played that first full season, like the week after the draft. And that gave the players enough time to get signed by an NFL team and have some off-season work with that NFL team, and then have a month, 6 weeks off before camp started so they'd get a break. Where now, they just played the championship game Saturday at the UFL. And that's a lot later than our season was. It's a good month later. And, how many of these guys are going to end up getting contracts in the league? I think that, a few do, but how many actually make it? And it's very few. And I think it's because of the way they got their seasons set up. It's just too late in the year. You're not getting to look at them during the off season.
Indeed. Lee Bruin wants to know, would some of the old era players like Reggie White, Walter Payton, Butkus, etc., would they play well nowadays, and what would they command in salaries?
Well, I mean, their salaries would be commensurate with what the salaries are today if they're the same player. But, reality is, I'm probably being sacrilegious here. Butkus played in an era that, there wasn't speed like there is now.
Right.
Okay, so Butkus wouldn't be the same player in today's game. As great a player as he was, it was a different era. And, Butkus was probably a 5 flat linebacker, something like that. He wasn't a guy who could run real fast.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those guys, as great as they were, but they're playing against players in their era. So, you're comparing apples to apples. Now it's apples to oranges because these guys they weren't training year round then. They're training year round now. They're better athletes. They're bigger, faster, stronger. Back when Butkus was playing, a big offensive tackle was 275 pounds.
Yeah. And he was 245 thereabouts.
Okay. Just remember when in 1985, the Bears drafted the Fridge, and people thought, well, a big fat guy, and he was like 305. Come on.
Yeah.
And he's just another guy right now.
That's so true. Yeah, I agree with you. Butkus might not have been the god at linebacker in today's era, but he probably would have been moved to a different position. Maybe defensive line, told to add 30, 40 pounds and play the defensive line position. Just the heart that he played with, he would have found a spot in today's NFL and probably played at a high level, but maybe not the ferociously high level that he did in the 60s and 70s.
You look at, because I grew up in Buffalo, so and this was even, around the same time, a little later, but when OJ was playing, and they had the offensive line was called the Electric Company, and they had some really good players. Reggie McKenzie was the right guard. He weighed 245 pounds.
That's amazing.
Joe DeLamalure was the left guard. He was about 255. And the tackles were like 265 and 270. They were small. I mean, those guys, if you went out to look at those guys down in college, you would reject them.
Yeah.
And not only could they, reject them, they couldn't even play because they just didn't have the frames like these guys have now.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, let's get to another couple of questions here. We have one recently from Florida Bears fan. Does Greg think it will how long does Greg think it will take for the Bears to gel with all the new players and coaches? You mentioned that Ben Johnson said for the offense, maybe 6 weeks. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's how much they're limited in time. The league limits the amount of time you have to practice, but you got walkthroughs and stuff, and where you don't have double sessions, you do have walkthroughs. And so that counts as your second practice, so to speak. But those are all learning situations. So those have to become valuable. And part of it too, and I'm getting away from the direct question, is let's say for a week and a half or 2 weeks, be it somewhere else or a local high school, Caleb's got to get the wide receivers together and the skill people together and, start working on stuff on their own. And, stuff that's already been installed. So, and part of it is to get ready for camp, and part of it is just to get a head start, and other teams do it. There's that, and it's deciding who's going to be your players, and you don't want to do that too fast because you want to give young guys an opportunity. Sometimes it takes younger guys a little bit longer in camp, to take that step from college to the NFL, and you got to give them time to do it. So, it's a hard question to answer. And I think part of it is on the players to do what they can to be ready, but it's also on the coaching staff not to overload the players with too much.
Yeah, makes sense. Ramsey asked a question: did you have Odunze or Burden rated higher coming out of college, and why?
Oh, Odunze.
Easily?
Yeah, I do. Odunze, he was a legitimate top 10 pick. Burden was a 20 to, he went 39, and he was, a 20 to 40 guy.
Mm-hmm. Burden was also victimized by an offense that didn't have other playmakers, so there was a lot of focus
There was that,
on
and they
him.
didn't have a good quarterback either.
That's probably a
So,
bigger issue.
I mean, Missouri is Missouri. I always thought that move by Missouri going to the SEC from what was the Big 12 was a bad move on their part. Now, it's taken them a while, but they've caught up where they're not challenging for a title, but they're getting into bowl games and stuff. And I just had they stayed in the Big 12, would they be a lot better off than they are competing in the SEC? I mean, nobody can probably answer that question. I just thought it was a strange move. And I know what it was all about. It was all about money. But, to me, it wasn't necessarily a good fit. And just from a recruiting standpoint, where you got the hotbed of recruiting is in the Southeast, and they're in the middle of the country.
Creighton asks, and I've always wondered this too, why can't they have all 52 players eligible to play on game day? Explain to us why only 48 get to dress. What's the deal?
I don't know why they came up with it. Part of it is because they want to be fair. Team A may have a couple guys injured, and so why should you dress 53 and the other team can only dress 49? So you got a competitive advantage. Well, tough shit.
Right.
I agree. I think all guys on the team should be able to dress. They don't. They're getting paid. It's not like they're making any less money for not dressing.
Yep.
So I don't know. That's a league and a union thing.
People are talking about some yesteryear players. Greg, I would love your thoughts. If you had to choose between one of these two players, who would you choose? Brian Urlacher or Lance Briggs?
Well, I mean, we didn't draft Brian. Brian got drafted the year before we came.
Right.
We drafted Lance, but I mean, Brian's in the Hall of Fame, and deservedly so. So you got to go with Brian, but I think Lance deserves to be in the Hall at some point. Good player. Just one of the most instinctive players I've ever been around.
Do you think that Briggs had a lot to do with Urlacher's success, meaning that he had responsibilities in the defense that allowed Urlacher to play more of that roaming linebacker, kind of a third safety, also able to play near the line of scrimmage?
Well, in Lovey's scheme, if you look at the important players, it's the three technique and the will linebacker. Okay, our three technique was Tommy Harris, drafted him as soon as Lovey got here, and the will linebacker was Lance Briggs. Everything revolves around those two players. And we had strong corners. We had at the beginning, we had Mike Brown, but after we lost Mike Brown, I don't think safety, it was good, but it wasn't great.
Okay.
I remember Bobby DePaul is our pro guy. He goes, "This defense, you got to be strong in the middle. Two defensive tackles, your Mike and your Will, and your two safeties.
Yeah.
It's going right down the middle." He goes, "If you're real strong there, you're going to win." That's the way the defense was. So, every defense has their own design and how they want to steer things. But the will line and the will linebacker being so important, that goes back, Tony Dungy days at Tampa, and they had Brooks playing the will linebacker, who was a undersized guy for that time, but just so fast and so instinctive that, he kind of changed the way that will linebacker played. And you can go back to Minnesota for the three technique because of Floyd Peters was really running the same scheme. Excuse me. And what was the the little 3 technique they had at Minnesota. He's all pro. Randall?
Yes.
John Randall.
John Randall.
And I mean, that was your first dominant 3 technique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, made a huge difference. I know when he played against the Bears, he was a huge difference maker. Okay, here's probably the most important question of the day. Greg, when are you doing your brisket?
I got to get a brisket to do it, which I don't have. You know, my wife is coming home next week for about 10 days.
Nice.
My kids might be visiting.
Nice.
So, you know, over the 4th. So I don't know if I'll do a brisket, but I know I'm going to do ribs.
Mm-hmm.
See, the problem with a brisket is a brisket takes 12 hours.
I know. That's the
so that, I mean, you know, if you're going to smoke it, you're going to smoke it right.
Yeah.
You know, you got to start at 3:30, 4 in the morning.
Oh boy.
So, I mean, you're getting up early because you got to get your fire ready, and then you get the temperature, and you got to, you know, just keep it temperature controlled with the smoker,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure you got enough hardwood in there to get the proper amount of smoke in there.
Mm-hmm.
I love doing it, but you're worn out. You don't always have the energy to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's the problem. Absolutely. It's very much well, I mean, for me, it's like when you're hosting a party, right? And when I'm hosting a party, I want to make sure all my guests are having a good time. By the time that party is over, I'm like, I didn't get to eat. I didn't get to have a good time because I was,
I know, because you're entertaining. I get it. I love doing a brisket. I don't
Mm-hmm.
love doing the work that's involved
Mm-hmm.
as I get older.
Yeah.
Because I know it means getting up probably at 2:30.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got to do a lot of prep work the day before. So, you know, I season it, and then I put it in the refrigerator while it's seasoning, cut all the fat. I do all that prep work the day before.
Mm-hmm.
And then I put the rub on, you know, the night before, and I let it sit in the refrigerator. But then you got to pull it out for about 45 minutes to get to room temp before you put it on on the fire. So there's a lot of prep work, and then you got to, you know, cook it for 12 hours, depending on the size.
Skeletor wants to know, what do you use to smoke? You use a Traeger?
No, I got I got 2, but one's broken. So the master built one is broken. The motor's broken. And it's a $29 part, but it's putting it in that's a bitch. But I got a Smoky Mountain, a Weber Smoky Mountain.
Yeah.
But, I mean, those are great. And, you know, my buddy who taught me a lot about smoking, he lives out in Vegas now, and he's got pellets now out in Vegas. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't like pellets anywhere near as much as using the hardwood. And I'll use different hardwoods depending on what I'm smoking, you know, what meat I'm using. But I'll tell you one thing he said about that he's learned being in Vegas is that it's so dry that he said keeping the meat moist while you're smoking is really difficult.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Chris Watts wants to know, can't you just order it for delivery, like DoorDash or something?
You know, it's funny, my wife found the store near her apartment in Detroit. She goes in there and, you know, she saw like burn ends and stuff. She goes, oh, I'm going to get that. And so she gets and brings her back to her apartment. She goes, they were awful as compared to what I make or there's this one place in Waukegan that has got great barbecue called Big Ed's. You ever heard of it?
Yeah. Definitely.
And, you know, she said it didn't even come close.
Really?
Yeah. This place at this one store. So she goes, never again with that.
Oh, I'm with Lee. You're making me very hungry right now. So let's.
I haven't eaten yet today. I'm getting hungry too.
Yeah, same here. I have not eaten, so I'm gonna run out and get something. Greg, another great show. We've got an upcoming show where we're gonna invite some of you barflies to join us in the bar room here and to have short conversations, dialogue with Greg. So if you're interested, hit me up at the Barroom Network's DM, or you can email me. Let me put my email up here. Aldo Barroom, I'll use this account at gmail.com. If you're interested, we can definitely make it happen. All I ask is that you have a good, connection so that there aren't any Wi-Fi problems. So hit me up at aldobarroom@gmail.com if you want to have a short discussion with Greg Gabriel. We'll have our annual, chat. We started it last year, actually, and it was supposed to be a debate, and everybody seemed to agree with what Greg was saying. So it wasn't much of a debate. So you're welcome to debate, agree, just have a conversation with Greg about football or whatever.
No politics allowed.
Yes, now Aldo will get a lot of a million spams. Yes, no politics allowed. No
We
kings.
go 2 hours today. Holy cow, it's 1 o'clock already.
Look at that. Holy cow. All right, Greg, again, phenomenal job. Thank you very much. I will see you next week, and thank you all very much for attending live, and thank you, Manny, for your contributions to the bar room. I will see you all very soon. Bye-bye.
See you next week. Thanks.